Don't be afraid to dive into feelings with your kids and empower them. Anxiety can be a beautiful thing in that it teaches our kids so much. They're learning how to tap into their strengths and face fears.
You're listening to the Mindful Mama podcast, episode number 275. Today, we're talking about how to help anxious kids with Natasha Daniels. Welcome to the Mindful Mama podcast, now with over 1 million downloads. Here, it's about becoming a less irritable, more joyful parent. At Mindful Mama, we know that you cannot give what you do not have, and when you have calm and peace within, then you can give it to your children. I'm your host, Hunter Clark-Field's Mindful Mama mentor. I help smart, thoughtful parents stay calm so they can have strong, connected relationships with their children. I've been practicing mindfulness for over 20 years. I'm the creator of Mindful Parenting, and I'm the author of Raising Good Humans, a mindful guide for breaking the cycle of reactive parenting and raising kind, confident kids. Hey, welcome back to the Mindful Mama podcast. I'm happy you are here. I have to say, dear listener, I'm so excited because I am totally vaccinated now. And I went out to dinner with some friends and hugged them for the first time in so long. And we went out to a restaurant. We ate out on the deck, but it was so wonderful to do something out in the world. I feel so much more relaxed now. Oh, it's amazing. So I'm hoping that you are in the same boat wherever you are around the world. I know that my listeners all around the world are maybe having a more difficult time getting the vaccine than those of us in the States. So I am thinking about you and hoping you get your COVID-19 vaccine soon so that all our lives can go back to normal. Oh my gosh. Or go back to something new, whatever's new and ready for us next. And this whole crisis has caused so much anxiety, of course, which is what we're talking about today. And it is for adults and for kids. And we've had a lot of work to deal with it. So I'm so excited for you to join me at the table as I talk to Natasha Daniels, because she's an anxiety and OCD child therapist and a mom of 3 kids with anxiety and OCD. So if you have been worried about your kids worrying, this is definitely the episode for you. She's the host of the AT Parenting Survival podcast, the YouTube channel Ask the Child Therapist, and the creator of atparentingsurvival.com. And we're going to talk about, when are these fears and anxieties for kids normal and when are they cause for concern? And how do we even tell it in a time like this, right? Like this is a very unusual time in the course of our human history, right? So you're going to hear some really valuable insights into what signs to watch out for and how we as parents are best able to support our kiddos. And there are some important takeaways I want you to listen for. What normal anxiety looks like versus an anxiety disorder, right? So we don't want to be fueling our own anxiety and our own worry or helicopter-y tendencies and think our kids have anxiety disorders if they're anxious. We're going to talk about what the difference is. We're going to talk about how to help our kids cope and learn from anxiety and the importance of empowering our kids and celebrating their bravery. It's really valuable. I know that on the Mindful Mama team, we have some members whose kids have anxiety and they got immediately helpful advice from listening to this episode. So be sure to listen all the way to the end. And I just want to remind you that you can see clips from this episode as well as short teaching sessions from me over at our YouTube channel. If you are wanting to kind of share some little bits of what you hear on the podcast, this is a really great way to do it. Or if you want to learn more about mindful parenting, you can go to the YouTube channel, the Mindful Mama Mentor YouTube channel, and find all that. You can share it with a partner, share it with friends. And when you go over there, make sure you subscribe so we can grow our little baby channel and get this information out to more parents. So I know you're going to get so much out of this. I don't want to delay a moment longer. So let's dive into this episode. Natasha, thank you so much for coming on the Mindful Mama podcast.
Yeah, my pleasure.
I'm happy to talk to you because, thinking about anxiety with kids, it's like, oh gosh, it's like makes us like anxious just even thinking about that. But you talk about your therapist, and you also talk about how you have your own kids with anxiety. How did you start to realize they were struggling with anxiety? Like what was your, what ages, what were some of the signs that you saw in your own kids?
Actually, I started treating kids with anxiety before I even had kids.
Mm.
And so, the universe was like, haha, we'll just give her a couple of her own, more than a couple. So I was actually in an infant and toddler mental health program, like a postgraduate program that my job at the time required me to do when I had my first child. And so I feel like I was really fortunate in the sense that um, I would kind of raise my hand and be like, well, isn't that normal? Or are like, aren't we pathologizing kind of toddler behavior? And then eventually the professor was like, I think you should probably have early intervention assess your child. I was like, what?
Wow.
So yeah, I did not recognize the early signs because they don't look like your typical anxiety.
Mhm.
But then by the third kid, I was like clued in when she was having constipation and afraid to poop and had all these anxiety issues that you wouldn't probably put under the category of anxiety.
Huh. So what makes it, yeah, I mean, and I have those questions too. Like what makes it something where we say my child is struggling with anxiety versus we all just have fears, and fears happen in childhood and they arise normally and they pass away normally and that kind of thing. Like what are some of the differences between anxiety that we want we want to worry about to be like kind of versus normal anxiety, because that's part of being human.
Yeah, it's a good question because I feel like it's not about necessarily when we're talking about anxiety and not OCD. It's not the anxiety theme, it's the severity and the acuity of the anxiety. So when it's showing up and it's debilitating and your child can't move on and they can't function. So a lot of times it's the level of it because you have developmentally, it's normal to have fear, it's normal to have anxiety. There's environmental stressors that are going on currently. It's normal to feel stressful and anxious, but it's the level of anxiety I think that happens that causes that. And then I also think being proactive isn't a bad thing anyway. So even if because I think sometimes we split hairs of like, well, is that an anxiety disorder or is that just an anxious child because of developmentally, they're going through that. And either way, we can do things as parents to proactively help build resiliency and build an approach on how our kids deal with those struggles regardless.
Is it, and yeah, and I worry about that idea that we like say anxiety, like having worries and anxiety, that feeling of anxiety is like wrong or bad. Like that's just, from from my point of view, in a lot of ways, like it's just such a normal part of the human spectrum, right? But we are also like, I think we are afraid of anxiety. Like we shoot that double arrow, that second arrow at it, where we're afraid of, I mean, I remember when I was looking at my own anxieties that I dealt with, I was even yeah, in my late 20s, I remember even being like afraid of saying the word anxiety. Like it made me anxious to say the word, and so yeah, I guess I'm not sure what my question is here, but like that, when we talk about this with kids, um what kind of, I guess maybe what kind of approach do we want to take as parents, like to, are there ways to avoid the like not, avoid that, being afraid of normal fears and anxieties? Do you see what I'm saying?
Yeah, and I do feel like in that sense, it can be different. So having anxiety or having fears and helping our kids be resilient and accept those physiological responses and being clued into their body is so helpful. And I feel like everybody should have that. That's a life skill that should be taught. When you have an anxiety disorder, though, and sometimes you don't know that until your kids evolve further, and sometimes as a grown up, you don't know that until you look at your child and then you realize that you have your own anxiety disorder. I feel like that is different than your normal, fight or flight response or, your normal brain trying to protect you. I feel like, being bombarded with intrusive thoughts, can feel different
Mm-hmm.
than an anxious person who just gets a little stressed when they have to take a test. And so in that sense, it can be different. And the approach that you can take can be different depending on your personality style and what's going to resonate with you.
Yeah. So there's a spectrum, right, where we're looking at, where when is it kind of like debilitating your life, or when is it debilitating your child's life? And like you said, like a lot of people, their child gets diagnosed with ADHD, and then oh, look at me, I have all those things too. Did you discover that in your own life, where you're like, oh, here's my child having an anxiety issue, and then did it point a mirror back to yourself?
It did. And I think we can learn so much from our kids because I think they are little mirrors sometimes into, especially these things that are genetic. There's a
Mm-hmm.
highly genetic component to anxiety disorders. And when you see them in your child, it can definitely trigger like your own memories of your own childhood. And even seeing them struggle, realizing that you're modeling for them, how to handle this anxiety theme. And so I know 2 out of my 3 kids have social anxiety. My 3rd one, I think he's got a little flavor of that too. But especially my youngest, who's very similar to me personality-wise, like, she would call me on my own stuff, and as she was working on her social anxiety, she would say, "Mom, I think that's your social anxiety." And she'd be right. And so then I had to model, what I'm trying to teach her to do, to get through those fears, to not accommodate my anxiety and do something so that people wouldn't look at me in a weird way, to embrace myself in all my weirdness. And so it's been a really cool journey actually for both of us, for all of us, not just her and I, to do that.
I love that, to embrace your own weirdness. So that's so cool. So what are some of the signs of anxiety in kids? What should we be looking for as parents?
It can differ in kids depending on their different themes. But I think if I was to say in general, you want to look for things that are debilitating them, because we're talking about anxiety disorders
Mhm.
versus in, a sensitive child who is just a little bit more sensitive to the world. I mean, you can have both, but when you have an anxiety disorder, your child might be avoiding basic things. They may not be able to go to school, or they may not be able to go to the bathroom. They may not be able to go to bed on their own, way beyond what is developmentally appropriate. They may not be able to do their schoolwork without crumbling to a level that isn't kind of typical for that age. So when you're seeing it impact their social and emotional growth, I think that's a concern. And also physiologically, you get a lot of somatic complaints with anxiety. So if your child is having, tightness in their chest, or they're complaining about a racing heart, or they're having a lot of GI issues, you want to do a lot of rule outs because there's a lot of somatic issues. So constipation, and not that your child can't have any of these without anxiety for sure, but these are things that get missed. I think nausea and GI issues, migraines, things that can cause a lot of physical issues.
So constipation can be a sign of anxiety in kids?
It's definitely a red flag. So one doesn't equal the other,
Yeah.
but it's a weird correlation because your body's slowing down. And so it slows down a lot of times the GI tract. And so sometimes one of the earlier symptoms can be constipation, because your body will either say, okay, we don't have time for this, and release. And so you get like diarrhea, when you're in that kind of lovely, that immediate like fight or flight response. But when you've been under stress for a long period of time, your body actually can slow down that GI tract. And so you get a lot of constipation because it's spending its energy in lots of different areas. And so the constipation becomes a common one.
Yeah, because your body, if your body's in that stress response, in that fight, flight, or freeze response, it's like moving energy away from the rest and digest response, which is the opposite, and towards like the tightening of the muscles and the getting ready for action kind of thing.
Right.
Okay. All right. So constipation, you said sleep issues, right? Isn't that one of them? A sign
Yeah.
of anxiety that we want to look for? And what are we looking for there?
And sleep issues, and you can have, I just want to also like just stress again, you can have these issues without having an anxiety disorder, but these are just things like when you start looking at the big picture, these are the things that might be little subtle indicators besides a child like balled up in a corner crying and being fearful, which I think is, what most people think of anxiety. They don't look for these smaller, subtle things. Um, Sleep is a very scary time for people with anxiety disorders because it's like a little mini 8-hour death. It's scary. You're like letting go of control. You're shutting your eyes. You don't know what's going to happen. And so a lot of different anxiety themes can pop up. Also, it's a really quiet time. So your anxiety has the microphone and your brain is ready to give it its attention. So a lot of times, not all the time, but a lot of times you'll see sleep is a problem. Either they're scared to sleep or they're wondering where their parent is at, or they don't want their parent to go to bed before them. Like there's a lot of rules around sleep, or there's a lot of ritualistic behavior around sleep, or they're afraid of bad guys. There's like just so many different themes that hit upon sleep.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. So this morning, I washed my hair with Gemist shampoo, conditioner, and their amazing scalp bar. And I did not dry my hair. And it looks really good. And that never, ever happens to me. I mean, I don't know. My scalp is a little funky and whatnot. Gemist is amazing. I have to just share my personal experience with them because I'm so thrilled that they're a sponsor. I took their quick 2-minute quiz and their fancy schmancy algorithm matched me with the best shampoo and conditioner and scalp balancing bar. I have to admit, I had no idea what a scalp bar was, but it removed buildup and more. And it's not magic, it's science. And a bonus, you can save money with Gemist by subscribing. Did I mention that Gemist also smells amazing? Like there are hints of mixed berries, pink pepper, lily of the valley. It's so complex and lovely. This is a woman-owned company where you can get a subscription where you save 20% on every order with this smart subscribe and get free shipping. It's shipped right to your door, which makes it so easy. You don't have to think about it. And it's high quality. With the ingredients, it's sulfate-free, paraben-free, dye-free. It's never tested on animals, and it's manufactured in the US. If you are ready to have the best hair of your life, try Gemist. Right now, my listeners can give Gemist a try and get 20% off their shampoo and conditioner smart subscription. Smart subscribers already save 20% off on each order, so this is an amazing deal. And with free 2-day shipping, you can have it by this weekend. Just visit gemist.com to get your personalized recommendation and enter the code HUNTER at checkout for 20% off and free 2-day shipping. That's gemist.com, GEMMIST.com, and enter the code HUNTER at checkout to get the best hair of your life. That there's a lot of things resonating for me as you describe this for my own daughter. But then I thought of myself when I was a kid and the sort of nightmares I had all the time and the sort of the fears around sleep. But one thing I've been thinking about with my own child who's 10 is that she's definitely highly sensitive. That's really clear and definitely has anxieties. And one thing that my husband and I have been worried about for some time is this, she listens to she's read Harry Potter 8 times, the whole series. And she listens to the audiobooks on her headphones, almost constantly. She does, what I'm thinking is that it's really soothing for her, and you're not hearing then any sort of worry, anxiety thoughts, I guess, when you got, comforting Harry Potter where the story inside and out and left and right in your ears.
Yeah. And that makes sense, where it doesn't have to worry about hearing creaks, and it depends. Everyone's different as far as what they worry about, but quieting the mind or quieting the house are definitely 2 things that help.
Okay. All right. So sleep, signs in the body. And I think also you mentioned that hyper are like in smaller kids, like hyperactivity is a sign of anxiety, hyper arousal.
It can be.
Hmm.
Sometimes ADHD is misdiagnosed and it's actually anxiety. Um, because when you're anxious, you can have a lot of jittery behavior.
Hmm.
So it's good to have a therapist who can rule out, who understands anxiety and ADHD. They are comorbid conditions, so you can have both very easily. But like my son, who's 11, he looks very hyper at times. When he is anxious and he's stressed, he's literally bouncing off the walls, like he's bouncing on the couch. And if someone was a fly on the wall, they'd be like, "Oh, that poor child, it definitely has ADHD." But you have to look at the pattern. He's only doing that when he's anxious or stressed. And so a lot of times you'll see that high activity level when a child is like hyper aroused, and overstimulated with anxiety.
Okay. So, knowing that anxiety is an energy, right? Like it's like our body is like building energy to be able to respond, right? Like if we're in that stress response, our nervous system is putting energy into the muscles, into tightening the muscles and in the extremities and et cetera in order to take action, right? Because it's like fear response, fear of a threat. So, knowing that, I'm just curious, like, it maybe kind of as we kind of shift into, um, like some of the things that maybe that kids can do about this. I mean, I guess there's a lot more to kind of talk about it, but I guess one of the things that might end up being really helpful is like just like exercise. Imagine, right? Like burning that energy off. Is that something you
Yeah,
talk about?
it really depends on the child. I feel like tapping into what innately makes them feel better. Kids can kind of intuitively know what makes them feel better. Like my son, I would find him sandwiched in between his mattress. And I noticed eventually, like whenever he's and sometimes anxiety will look like rage and anger, and that's another thing. It'll look like disruptive behavior. And so his
Mm,
anxiety looks like it does not look like anxiety. It looks like anger. And
mm,
I will find him balled up somewhere, either like under the beanbag or like in when he was in between my mattress. That was a very clear eye-opening moment for me. I was like, he's wanting deep pressure. Like he obviously, his body, his nervous system is so like dysregulated that he is looking for physical deep pressure. So I think that kids will, you want to look at, just observe their behavior. What are they doing when they're feeling anxious, like intuitively, to get what they need? And sometimes it is movement. It is for him, for sure, deep pressure and movement. And
mhm,
for other kids, who are already getting a lot of physiological overwhelmness, they're already feeling like their heart is racing and they're feeling panicky. I know, like, I had panic attacks when I was a teenager, and exercise would be the worst thing for me because I
mhm,
already felt like my heart was racing. And so any
mm.
movement and I felt like I couldn't catch my breath. So anything that would, accentuate that would definitely cause more anxiety. And so I actually needed to just have like an orange, which was so bizarre. I needed to have a cold orange. I needed to have like coldness on my face. So that became kind of my coping mechanism. So I think it's tapping into helping your child connect the dots of what do they need? What does their body need?
So it's like kind of like opening up that, personal self-awareness and that intuition about what's going on for them. And anxiety is linked to obsessive compulsive disorder, right? Are they connected together?
They really aren't as much as people think
Mhm.
they are. They like to hang out together. They're definitely comorbid conditions. And so if you have OCD, the likelihood of you having anxiety is very, very high, like generalized anxiety. But they are very different disorders. And I think that people kind of get that confused because how you treat OCD versus anxiety is very different too. So, um,
So how are they different? Explain it. I don't,
okay.
because I can imagine obsessive compulsive disorder, right? Like you're worried about some things in the world, and so you have a ritualized kind of like behavior that is soothing, right? I mean, I don't know. Tell
Yeah.
me. I know I'm certainly wrong, and
Well, that's definitely like the Cliff Notes version of it.
okay.
You have like an intrusive thought or feeling, and I think people miss the feeling part. And you have to do or avoid something to get some brief relief. But the more you do or avoid, the bigger it grows. And so I think people think of OCD and they think germs and hand washing and neurotic behavior. And they don't realize that you can have an intrusive thought that says, I was going to say a bad word, or you can have an intrusive thought that says I'm a bad person, and you have to do or avoid something to get that brief relief. I think we think of checking and tapping and cleaning, and we don't realize the other nuances that happen with OCD. And OCD is less of the anxiety themes are different often, not doesn't have to be 100%, but the OCD thoughts and feelings are often different. And I think that gets confused too. It's not really just like a fight or flight response. It's not like, let me just protect myself, and now I have things I need to do to protect myself. You can have sensory motor OCD where you feel like you have to pee over and over and over again. It's a misfiring, and it involves the basal ganglia. So it's a different part of the brain than some of the anxiety stuff that we look at. So there's this weird overlap, but there's also some very separate things that are purely OCD and not anxiety based.
Okay. All right. So I'm imagining the listener hearing this and hearing like, any number of these things we're talking about and saying, oh, that sounds like my child. Because there's a lot of overlap with for any number of reasons, right? So if a parent is worried about my child's either anxious about something in their life, or maybe they're what Natasha is talking about with they have a disorder and now I need to worry about that. What are some of the first things that a parent should be like looking for or doing or to help their child with this?
If it's OCD, and a lot of stuff I'm talking about, just to take a step back,
Hmm.
can be other things. So I think it's always important when you're listening and you're getting new information to say, this is a piece of the puzzle, but it may not be my piece. It's just one piece of a puzzle. If a child is trying to pee over and over again, they might have a UTI, and so take them to the doctor and rule that out, just to
Yeah.
throw that out there. But when we're talking about OCD, and the difference between anxiety and OCD is you're going to look at a lot of compulsive behavior. Your child's doing a lot of stuff that doesn't make sense, or even they're asking you questions over and over, and they're not satiated by that. And so you're answering them, and they're asking you again, and they're asking you again. Maybe they even want you to respond in a certain way, and they seem very distressed if you don't give them that response. And you're in this vicious loop. That's different often than the anxious person who will say, Mom, and they'll ask you something about their anxiety. What was that noise? And then you answer it, and they're satisfied. Their anxiety
Mm.
can process this and get satisfied. It might come up tomorrow or the next day, but it's satisfied. With OCD, it's very repetitive. And so as a parent, when you start to see, wow, my child's, first of all, they're confessing weird things to me. They're like, Mom, 2 years ago, I think that I kicked the dog. And you're like, well, honey, don't worry about it. And then, you're seeing a pattern of questions that seem bizarre. That's a red flag. And if you're not able to help your child in the ways that a typical parent would, that's a red flag. Or if you're seeing them do quirky things around the house, they're tapping in a certain way, or they're making certain expressions, or they're, excessively washing their hands. That is actually, part of OCD. I think most people don't miss that one, but they miss the parent component of, you have to say a certain thing to me in a certain way, or I'm going to not be okay. So if you see those things, that's a red flag, and then seek out some help to get it assessed.
Okay. So for the OCD kind of behaviors, we want to just get help right away. And what might that help look like for,
It's
I
a
mean,
little
just in a nutshell?
Yeah. Look for an OCD therapist. So go
Yeah.
to like the International OCD Foundation. You can go to iocdf.org/find-help. And I memorize that because there aren't a lot of OCD therapists, and they'll rule it in, or they'll rule it out. And then you can just cross that off your list.
Okay, cool. So let's step back again to kids who are having anxiety. They may be having sleep issues, they may be angry, they may be they may what were some of those things again that you were pointing to that they might have?
They might be hyper aroused. They might be defiant. I feel like a lot of times, especially not to stereotype, but sometimes more in boys, you'll see more aggressive, defiant, oppositional behavior. And if it seems like it's out of nowhere, or it's uncharacteristic, or it's not consistent, and there's a pattern to it, sometimes that's a sign too.
So there's like fears, there's anxieties coming in their body, and so then they're acting out aggressively because driven by these feelings of fear or anxiety.
And a lot of times it's a parent request. So, and I'll give you an example. This is a
Mm-hmm.
really long time ago, but it's such a good example. I use it a lot. Um, my son had to go like empty the trash bins around the house, and it was like a very simple chore, and he was freaking out about it. And he's normally a pretty good helper, and so his reaction was very big. And I moved kind of in like mama annoyance mode, where I was like, honestly, like you have to pitch in. But then I paused because he does have an anxiety disorder, and I said, well, what's the hardest part about you know emptying these bins? And I didn't have any kind of condescending tone in my voice. I like wanted to know. And his answer was not what I expected. It's dark in those rooms. It was daylight, so it wasn't dark, but it wasn't what I was expecting. It's boring or it's stupid or why do I have to do this or I want to get back on my video game. It was an anxiety answer. So his opposition and his anger, which was escalating because I was escalating, it could have turned into like a typical parent child moment where I like punished him and he like kicked something and went and hit. We could have done that dance,
Mm-hmm.
and we have, but for some reason I paused in that moment, and then he was able to reveal that. So sometimes I think kids who don't have good communication, I mean, even though he's like my kid, he did not articulate his feelings well at all.
Mm-hmm.
Something I actually sent him to therapy for, someone who's not his mom to teach him. So a lot of our kids who can't articulate things, they're going to have that, fight mode when you are triggering their anxiety inadvertently and you don't know it.
Okay. All right. And so you're able to step back in that moment and kind of check in with him. And, that kind of goes back to that whole idea of like kids who are acting badly or feeling badly. And so you're able to kind of like find out like, why is he feeling badly about this kind of thing? And that was a clue.
Yeah. Yeah. It's always good to explore that.
Okay. All right. So if we think our kids are suffering from anxiety and there's like a whole spectrum, right? Like it may be kids who are just suffering from anxiety, maybe there's an anxiety disorder happening. I'm imagining like if this were me, like probably the first things I would want to do is like see what I can do to help my child myself. So what are the things that parents can do to help their kids just kind of on their own?
I think educating your kids about anxiety and what it does to their body. I think kids are not connected to how they're feeling and what they're thinking and how it's shutting them down. So having open conversations about things that make them anxious and having them identify in their body what that feels like so they can kind of, because sometimes your body will be your first indicator, like, oh, I'm having a hard time breathing, why is this? And then getting them to tune into what things make them anxious. And this is regardless of whether they have an anxiety disorder or they're just a sensitive or anxious person. Because if you can get your child to rattle off, like, I get nervous when I'm around new people, and I get nervous, when I have to eat new food, and kids don't get that emotional education and emotional intelligence typically in school. Maybe one day they will, but we can do that for our kids. That's a gift to, like, if you ask my daughter, you know, what are your anxiety triggers? She's 9, but she'll be like, well, I'm afraid of throw up and I'm afraid of like embarrassing myself. And she'll like list them off because she's been like trained to be able to identify. So I think the first step is teaching what anxiety is, how it feels in their body, and what anxiety themes they have. And then the second step is, I always personify anxiety. I think that's helpful, but it's not the approach that everybody likes, and that's okay. It's like finding what works for your child. But we always name our anxiety at my house, and so we externalize it. So it's not necessarily something they are, it's something that they're dealing with. So they're either training their anxiety to respond in a different way. Or depending on your child's personality style, I have some boys I work with in my therapy practice who like want to crush it, or they want to like just, they're a little more aggressive. And so it just is whatever works for your child. But teaching them to walk towards anxiety or towards their fears, instead of away from it, is really helpful, because the more you avoid, the more your anxiety or your fears will grow. And so teaching any child, regardless of anxiety disorder, that when you take small steps towards your fears, you become empowered and you learn how to kind of retrain your brain that it's all okay.
So you're normalizing it with this conversation, and you might maybe even share your own like places in your life where you've had anxieties and what it felt like in your own body or something like that.
Yeah, normalizing it's really good, because if you don't have that communication aspect, your kids will, hide their anxiety and it'll go undercover, and it can manifest in physical ways. And so normalizing it, sharing your own experiences, not in a confidant sort of way, but in a modeling sort of way, can be so helpful.
Great. And I just want to kind of like underline that you're saying like not in a confidant way, like right now, maybe I'm, you know, like reaching out to your child as a friend to like get some support, but more like I've dealt with this in these situations, and this is how it felt for me, and this is what I did, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, you definitely want to have some intention when you're sharing with your children. I think sometimes we go the other extreme and we don't share at all because we want to have that parent-child relationship, that, in that defined role and boundary. But it's so good for our kids to know that we're human, and it's
Yes.
such a like untapped resource to like model that for them in a way that is
Yes.
very like intentional. And so, yeah, I think you want to wrap it up in a bow in some way.
Mhm.
Like whenever I share something with my kids, I have a goal that I want to like share with them. So I
Mhm.
might share a battle that I have with social anxiety after something happened. Like we had a situation a while ago where it was pajama day, and we this was pre-COVID, and so we went to a whole bunch of doctor, like they were going to see every doctor under the sun that day, because I have no idea why. We went to the dentist, and then we went to a specialist, and my daughter wanted to wear her pajamas like the entire time. And my social anxiety was like, oh my gosh, this is so embarrassing. They're gonna think like I'm just like one of those parents who just like brings my child in pajamas wherever, and they're 9. And I didn't say anything to my daughter. I didn't say anything to the doctors. Normally I'd be like, it's pajama day. Just, all that you're seeing is pajama day. And I didn't. But later I did share with my daughter that I did like a challenge for my anxiety, and I purposely, that it was upsetting for me, and that I sat with my discomfort, and I let people think things, that whatever they wanted to think, because I knew that I was okay either way. So I was sharing with her my struggle, but I was sharing it with a goal. And I
Mhm.
think that's different than being a confidant.
Yeah, good. I'm glad. Thank you for like I think that's good for us to like dive into that a little deeper and kind of see what that looks like and what that sounds like from somebody who's experienced that, right? Because we do want to be honest and authentic, and we want to like share. We need to model these things, and that's one of the biggest struggles that we've had, right? But as parents, is that these things weren't modeled for us, like emotional naming our feelings wasn't modeled for us, like
Yeah.
emotional intelligence wasn't modeled for us, and so that all this stuff can be really hard. But maybe we can think of our kids as a motivator to start to do these things, these uncomfortable things, like saying them out loud, or like sharing these things after the fact, and use, bring our own awareness to what's going on.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. What about kids who are so, my kids have a lot of resistance to like breathing into anything because their mom is the mindful mama mentor, and they're just like, don't even give me that, mom. And so when I ask a question like, where do you feel that in your body? They are just like, shut it down, mom. Like, I don't even want to get there. So,
Mhm.
any advice for me personally on this?
It's funny how kids, like, they'll, like, clue into what we do, and, like, and they'll rebel, because like,
Yeah.
I'm the CBT mom, so I'm like, "Let's attack your thoughts." And, I don't teach breathing the way that I should, and my daughter is so funny. The first thing she'll say if anyone asks her, like, "What helps?" She'll be like, "Breathing, but my mom doesn't teach breathing." So it's funny that your kids are like the opposite. You know, I, um, I trick kids into breathing.
Mm,
And so, getting them to do things when they're stressed, like, what I noticed, blowing in a balloon really seems to help you when you're upset. So go blow in a balloon, or why don't you go outside and blow some bubbles? So I think sometimes redirecting an activity, like my son's not into breathing, but he, I'll say, go blow some balloons and pop them, because he
mm,
likes the aggressive aspect of it. So if they know you want to, if kids know that we want them to do it, it's normal developmentally for them to say no. I'm not going to
mhm.
do it. So I will sometimes even use like reverse psychology with my kids. And I'll be like, you can sit there and be really overwhelmed. That's going to be up to you. Or, you can do something else. What do you think you should be doing? And getting them to pick their own coping mechanisms is helpful. You know,
Mm.
they may like something different. Like I didn't like breathing growing up because it made me hyperventilate, but then I
Mhm.
didn't teach my daughter that. And so she went to another therapist who is very much into like EMDR and breathing and things that I don't teach at all. And she loved it. And so when I say to her, like, what helps you the most? She'll always say, breathing in the cookies, blowing out the birthday candles. And she just loves that. And so, I respect that. So when she's having a hard time, the first thing I say to her is, okay, start your breathing.
Mm.
And actually even bought her for Christmas this little light. I don't know if you've seen these where like it's really expensive for what it is, but like it's like this little circle disc and you hit it and then it projects a blue light onto their ceiling and then
Mhm.
it breathes for
Mm.
them.
Oh,
And she loves that because it's just like it's a reference for her to breathe. It kind of paces her breathing and it's a focal point for her to calm down and it's blue and it's soothing and she loves it. So
that's beautiful. Okay. All right, cool. Well, with my daughters, sometimes I say, let's do a 3 breath hug. And we hug and I take 3 deep breaths, or I'll just give them a hug and I'll just say, I'm going to do a 3 breath hug. And I breathe deeply near them for them. You know what I mean? And that seems to, that gives them that connection to a calming presence in a lot of ways. And they'll start breathing more deeply if I just do it.
I
And
like
I don't tell them to.
yeah, they got those little mirror neurons going
Yeah.
where they're gonna resemble that.
So you mentioned a few things in letter form that I don't want the listener to feel like, wait, what was Natasha talking about? That I just want to kind of invite you to define. So you talked about CBT. So what is CBT?
So CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy.
Mhm.
So a lot of my work is attacking and reframing someone's thoughts because that's the
Mhm.
fuel line to an anxiety disorder is those thoughts. So even if I can calm my body and I can get into a better space, if I'm going to continue that fuel line, then
Mhm.
I'm going to just repeat the cycle. So reframing and attacking those distorted thoughts
Yeah.
is kind of what CBT focuses on.
And there's so much overlap there, of course, with mindfulness is like seeing those thoughts, interrupting that storytelling mind and bringing it back into reality, right? Which is like
Yeah.
actually in our senses, right? Like coming to our senses. So I love that. Cognitive behavioral therapy is CBT, dear listener. And you mentioned EMDR.
Yeah, and that's not something I practice or work on. Eye movement desensitization. I'd actually have to even look up what EMDR stands
Eye
for.
movement. Yeah. Oh, okay. So it's an eye movement therapy.
Yeah, and I really can't speak on it because I'm not EMDR trained. It's not my
No. I just
yeah.
curious about what is it? It's something your daughter does.
She doesn't do it. Yeah,
Oh,
but
okay.
her therapist does do EMDR.
I've heard about this. This is like okay, so I'm gonna just take a guess because I'm not a therapist, so I can say it out loud. It's like you're like moving your eyes in a certain pattern or something, and somehow it's like calming to the system. So this is a rough layman's guess of this.
Yeah, I don't even
Okay.
wanna guess because it's not my area, there's EMDR, there's tapping, there's
Yeah.
things having to do with moving your eyes and tapping your body. It's not my
Oh yeah,
specialty,
yeah,
so I really don't wanna mutilate the description of what it is and do it a disservice. It's just not something that I do for anxiety and OCD. So
yeah.
I'm very narrowly focused on my
Okay. So
specialty.
we're just gonna put a big old question mark over EMDR, dear listener. And if you
Google
can
it. There's
do
tons
some Googling on your own.
of
Uh,
research.
great. What are some things that what are some other ways that we can what are some ways we can help kids with it? Let's think about first the child who's just normally anxious or is highly sensitive. Like what are some ways we can help that child with anxiety? I mean, we already talked about modeling our taking care of our own feelings and being in our body, but elaborate a little bit on that, will you, Natasha? What are some of those ways we can help them?
Yeah, I feel like there's two other things to mention. So one, it's validating it, which I know sounds kind of like a cheesy therapist thing to say, but I think all too often we're uncomfortable with our kids' feelings. And so we swoop in and we say, you're fine, and with good intention, honey, you're fine, or it's no big deal, or it's just blah, blah, blah. And what we're inadvertently doing is we're discounting their child's fears, and it doesn't feel fine in their body. It doesn't seem fine. And so we want to initially just sit with that. Like, I know that's scary for you, or I know that feels really overwhelming for you. Or if you've named it, like we have in my house, be like, I know OCDs were really upset by that. So acknowledging that. And that doesn't mean that we're going to accommodate it or tiptoe around it now because we've validated it. It's just, that's the first step, is sitting with that. And then kind of like swinging in the totally opposite direction from that advice is, I think sometimes we feel a lot of us who have born anxious kids or sensitive kids are sensitive ourselves. And so we can like almost physically feel our child's anxiety. And it can be almost unbearable, like on a physical level, even depending on how sensitive you are. And so it seems like the maternal instinct or the paternal instinct is to just fix it. So I might say, honey, you're fine. Or I might be like, you're not fine and I'm not fine. Either way, the end result for some parents is to go in and fix it. So, oh, you're upset with that? Then let's just get rid of that. You don't like going to that class? Let's just not go to that class. The dark scares you. Let me just go with you. You can't cut your food. I'll cut it for you. And we get gratification because our child's anxiety goes down in that moment. And so it feels very good. Mm-hmm. But long-term, it's actually not helpful because we really want to empower our kids. And so some of the counterintuitive parental approach is, after you validate it, like, I know that's really hard for you. Let's find a tiny step that you can do to walk towards that a little bit. And so it may look like, and I'll give you an example. So when my daughter, I'm sure she probably doesn't appreciate this example, but I won't tell you which daughter, had a hard time, going to the bathroom. And part of that was because she used to get really constipated, so it hurt. But then, there were scares and fears around the toilet and the flushing, and bad guys are going to come out of the toilet, lots of stuff happening. But instead of me just saying, I know that's scary for you, and so I will always sit there and hold your hand. Like, we were at the point where I was on a stool when she was like 3, like holding her hand as she was going through it. That's a lot. I'll stand in the door frame while you do it because I know that you can do it. I know it's scary, but I know you can do it. And then I'm going to sit on the couch maybe, a few weeks after that because I know you can do it. So I think it's setting up these small steps of believing in our kids, even when they don't believe in themselves. And even when maybe privately we don't believe in them and we think, oh my gosh, they're going to just completely crumble, and give them a little small step towards that discomfort so they can learn how to build that resiliency.
Stay tuned for more Mindful Mama podcast right after this break. Therapy can be a powerful instrument for change and helps so many people, but traditional therapy can be expensive, and for many of us, it's inaccessible. Hundreds of dollars a month to text with a counselor? No thanks. Sesh offers a safe place for group support where you can connect with other people in similar situations, all led by expert therapists. Sesh is the leading mental health app for accessible group support facilitated by diverse, licensed therapists who are experts in their field. Sesh makes it easy to find your community. There are sessions for people of all different backgrounds on topics like living with anxiety or depression, building healthy habits, coping with COVID, managing stress, parenting, relationships, body image, low self-esteem, postpartum, and much, much more. Each sesh is a 60-minute online group support session led by an experienced therapist with a specific specialty, and each session has a maximum of 14 participants. Sesh also offers community-specific support for Black, Latinx, LGBTQIA+, the AAPI community, and more. Sesh is only $60 per month for unlimited group sessions with a licensed therapist. Sesh is recommended by top psychologists, therapists, and mental health experts, and it offers a cost-effective way to meet your mental health goals. Oprah Magazine named Sesh a top virtual mental health resource. It was the most affordable option on the list. Each new user gets a free 2-week trial. To take the first step, and go to seshtherapy.com today or download the Sesh app in the App Store today. Again, that's Sesh, S-E-S-H, therapy.com. Sesh is mental health care made easy, and we thank them for sponsoring the podcast. I really appreciate that because I tend to be like, well, they got to learn to do this thing on their own. So go do the thing sometimes, and those small steps, like just walking them through those small steps, that makes such a big difference. Like it sounds like that sounds very similar to, sometimes we talk about in mindful parenting and like sleep. It's like, well, what's the middle path? Maybe you say to your child, like, I'm going to be back and to check on you in 3 minutes. And then you go back and check in 3 minutes, right? Or I'm going to go back and check on you in 5 minutes. And I'm going to go back and check on you in 10 minutes, right? Like scaffolding these steps, ways to kind of scaffold these steps so that, we can just slowly, it's like weaning, right? Like slowly
Right.
wean them from your 100% full support for whatever that thing is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think sometimes we're afraid of our kids turning into a puddle. And so sometimes parents will say to me, well, Natasha, I've tried that. I've tried even the smallest step. And, she crumbles on the floor and she cries and she screams. And so I can't do that. And it's like, don't gauge your success by your child's immediate response. Because sometimes when we cave in that moment, we're inadvertently conveying to our child that we believe that they don't have it either. That almost happened actually today. I've been trying to get my daughter, this is totally not anxiety related. I've been trying to get her to cut her waffle. She's 9. It's a little ridiculous. And we worked on it for like 2 months where she would just melt down. She had to cut her own waffle in the morning. And she, got independent. And then today, I can't do it. And normally it's because she's maybe overwhelmed already. She was anxious about going to school today, and so I could easily just jump in there and cut it for her. It would save me time. I wouldn't have to, she'd be happy and it would seem like a win-win, but it's not. It's conveying a message to her that she really can't do it. And so instead we literally, I held the fork as she took the knife and use it like a saw, go back and forth, and even though it seems ridiculous, it was like conveying to her that I believe you can do this. And she's crying as she's doing it. And I think that happens with anxiety too. Like they don't want to maybe take that one step where you're at the door or you're going to check back in 3 minutes. But even if they cry for the full 3 minutes that you are away, your behavior is conveying that you believe in them and that they can do it and they will do it. And I think that's really tricky as a parent.
So how are you, and these are amazing steps to do, and these are amazing like behaviors for us to do as parents, right? Like these are like amazing things to do. And I bet that was really hard for you this morning with the waffle, because you're like, oh my goodness, child, like just get over this stupid waffle thing.
Yeah.
I can't believe I'm in this situation. Like I imagine there's annoyance, embarrassment, frustration, all these things coming up with you. For you, how did you navigate your own feelings and to be able to respond in such a skillful way in that moment?
Well, I'm definitely not always Mother Teresa. I have very ugly moments. So let's just put that out there. But today, I know that when I go backwards with her, I'm undoing everything. And so I just remind myself that I need to stick through it because there's such a good payoff. And I've seen this time and time again with all 3 of my kids. There's such a good payoff when you stick with your guns. Not every gun. It's like you have to pick your battles, but the waffle had been a battle I picked. So I think I compartmentalize pretty well as a therapist. So I just check out. I'm just like, this is ridiculous, but I'm holding the fork and she's just going to cut it and I'm getting out of there. And then apparently she cut it a little wrong. This is an anxiety thing, and see, I'm worthless. Look at this. And you have to cut it in a certain way, which I'm filing for later because that's interesting data. But I'm like, it doesn't have to be perfect. So in that moment, because I wasn't stressed today, I was in a good space. And that, I think that is something to mention too, is sometimes we're going to have ugly moments and we have to be kind with ourselves, because if I was stressed today and I was in a time crunch or I wasn't feeling well, I would not have been able to tolerate that. And I probably either would have just cut it for her because I wasn't in a good place, or I would have gotten really angry with her. But I was in a good place, which says something about making sure that we're okay. So I was able to hold the fork and be like, okay, and then it was a whole conversation about perfectionism. Waffles don't have to be cut perfectly and you don't have to be a perfect waffle cutter. And then we're not talking about the waffle anymore. We're talking about life, and it becomes a life lesson, which we don't always have those beautiful moments, but today was a good day.
Good. Yeah, I love how you pulled out that piece about you were like in this place where you were able to stay grounded and not take it so seriously, not add the drama to the situation of your own, of all those frustrations and things. I think that's really beautiful. And this piece about holding those boundaries with kindness and compassion, right? Like it's not going to do your child any favors to like go back on the waffle issue, to like take you know so that's holding a boundary with kindness and compassion, and it's a vote of, if you do it for them, it's a vote of no confidence in their inability. So what I also want to underline here is that you're talking, you have kids who deal with anxiety and have fears and things like that. Like they're still going to have all those boundaries and those expectations and life skills and all of those things. Like that's kind of what's underneath kind of what I'm hearing here too.
Yeah, and that is such a good thing to highlight, because I think sometimes when we have anxious kids or sensitive kids, we treat them with kid gloves because we think they can't really handle that. We don't want to break them, and we don't push them as hard, or we over accommodate. And the rest of the world isn't going to do that for them. So we can do that in a compassionate sort of way and walk them through these things so they become resilient, so that when they're out in the world and they have people who are less compassionate, who aren't going to, accommodate them, they can handle that because we've walked them through it. No one's going to hold her fork or wipe her butt, in the kind, considerate way that I have done over these years. But she's being coached through it so that she can tolerate it. If I never let her do these things, or the minute she crumbled, I swooped in and did it for her, then she would be really a big puddle by the time she was like 15. And that's not the goal.
I love that. So please, dear listener, don't be afraid of your kids' difficult feelings and difficult, upset reactions to, sometimes you may have to hold a boundary and your kid's not going to be happy about it. They may be upset, they may be worried, they may have feelings, and that's okay. They're going to have these feelings when our goal is not to make them feel good all the time, but it's to help them learn to cope with us, right? Like, so the coping skills are kind of like, we learn these coping skills almost like the way we learn any skill. Like first we do it with them or for them, right? First we do it for them, then we do it with them, and then they do it and we watch them do it, and then they do it on their own, right? Is that kind of
Yeah.
what?
Yeah. And I love how you said to like not be afraid of their emotions, because sometimes like we gauge our success as a parent on like our kids being happy. And that's just, one, it's unrealistic, but two, it's okay if our kids are sad or anxious or angry. It's just what they do with those feelings. And we want to convey that. And I think sometimes we say, like, I'm a successful parent because my child is happy, or I'm not successful because my child is anxious or sad or mad. And they're going to have all those emotions. And when we let them sit with those emotions, it's okay to be angry. It's just what you do with it. Go get a beanbag, go hit the beanbag, or it's okay that you're upset that you have to cut your waffle. I get this is frustrating. And your waffle's still here and you're still gonna have to cut it when you're ready. I'm not going to do it for you, but I get that it's upsetting. That allows them the space to have all those emotions and to learn self-regulation and to learn what helps and what doesn't. And it's validating. So I think we have to gauge our success as parents on how we navigate those moments, and also separate ourselves from our kids. And that sometimes good parenting and setting good boundaries isn't going to always be well received in the moment.
Yeah, yeah. And just because your child suffers from anxieties or maybe even has an anxiety disorder does not mean you're not a good parent, right? So what should parents do if you're listening and you're thinking, I think my child may have more than just sensitivity. I think my child may have more than just right, anxieties that are manageable. They seem to be really debilitating my child. What should they do then?
Yeah, I do feel like being proactive is the best thing to do. And I'm not saying that just because I'm a therapist. I just think it's a good thing to do. Give them those skills. So seek out an anxiety child therapist. You want to find someone who really only specializes in anxiety in a perfect world. for anxiety disorders, not just an anxious, sensitive kid, but an anxiety disorder, I am totally biased, so I'll just put that out there. But I do feel like a CBT therapist, cognitive behavioral therapy, is the best approach. It's evidence based, and you just want to do your research, because they're like, every therapist out there will say they treat anxiety, but not all of them use evidence based approaches. And so I would get support. And even if your child is not open to therapy, get your own support.
Mm.
Surround yourself with people who get anxiety, because it is highly genetic. And if you're being surrounded by friends and family who are blaming you, even if they're not intentionally doing it, but they're, talking about your parenting, or even if you see a therapist who is focusing on your parenting style and anxiety runs rampant in your family, you want to find an anxiety specialist, because we don't need that extra burden of feeling like I caused this, when we don't do that for kids who have diabetes.
I love that. I love that analogy. Like there are these causes and conditions. We know that, traumas are passed on, right? We know that all of these things are passed on in our genes through in our physical genes and through the causes and conditions that, that from our ancestors and the way we were raised in cultures and things like that. So yeah, like let's not be that blaming is not going to be helpful. Like get that help. Okay, so get the help for our kids and get the help for ourselves and start to practice these coping skills. Are there any I guess I'm thinking about, like, are there any kind of overall practices that you think would be helpful for parents who are to help maybe if they or their child are struggling with anxiety, or if they're worried, to kind of like forestall that. Do you know what I mean? Or to prevent that. Preventative.
Yeah, I feel like the earlier you start working on it, the better. I think some people don't want to like pathologize it, and so they take a wait and see approach. And you don't necessarily have to go see a therapist. That's
Mhm.
just an added support. If your child's really acute with their issues, it's definitely a good thing to do. But I think getting your child emotionally connected with their body and with their thoughts, their anxious thoughts, is really helpful. And so setting up challenges, like at my house, um, we set up challenges where, we have a framework for how to approach anxiety. So if you have a child with an anxiety disorder, you can either get a therapist to do this, or, I teach this in my online classes, or it's not rocket science anyway, is just create some sort of framework at home where, like, we give bravery points. And so it's kind of turning a behavior modification approach in your house. So if my child, and this happens unfortunately multiple times a day, because all my kids have anxiety disorders because it's genetic, and they have OCD, so there's a lot going on here. But if my son's having a problem, he might actually even come to me and say, "Mom, I'm afraid to go upstairs," and that's a kind of a common one for him. And so depending on what's going on with him, I might say, "Well, if you can go upstairs and just grab your shoes and come back down, you can earn a bravery point." And so this is how we talk. And so he likes Roblox, and so he wants Robux, and I don't give him Robux. He didn't even get any Robux for Christmas, because that is his commodity. And so he earns those only through bravery points. So we
Hmm.
have this set up, and it's part of the language of, even my 17-year-old is in on that, because she'll be like, I wanted her to come and get a Starbucks with me, and she had like cat fur all over her body, and she has an anxiety. She has social anxiety, and she's like, "Well, could I get a point for it?" And it was helpful to know, like, that's the level of panic she was feeling in that moment.
Mm.
So
Mhm.
I think developing some home behavior plan where your kids
Mhm.
are like earning bravery points, or you have a win board where you celebrate their steps towards things that are scary, like celebrating that bravery and that empowerment is really, really good.
That's an interesting idea, and then this idea that yeah, I can think of certain situations where it's like, here, just go ask so and so this thing. No, I can't do that, and then that could be a bravery point. That's really cool. Well, Natasha, it's been really fascinating to talk to you, and I really appreciate everything that you're doing. Is there anything that we miss that we should that we want to leave the listener with?
No, I think you covered a lot. I would just don't be afraid to, well, there's no pun intended on that one. Don't be afraid to dive into feelings with your kids and empower them. Anxiety can be a beautiful thing in that it teaches our kids so much. Like my kids are learning so much more about themselves than the average kid because of their anxiety disorders. They're learning how to tap into their strengths and face fears, and they're going to be more well prepared for life than the average kid because they're climbing mountains on a daily basis.
Yeah, they're having to learn these coping skills that maybe other kids wouldn't learn until much, much later. Yeah, absolutely. That's so
To
cool.
our kids.
Yeah, I love that. I love that, ending that on that positive, like, piece of that, we forget, right? Like, that these challenges are teachers. They're teaching some amazing things, and your kids are learning that in the safety of your home as kids, which is really cool. So thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you're doing and for coming on and for sharing all this. This is incredibly valuable. I know people are going to get so much out of this. Where can people find out more about you and what you're doing?
You can find out about me at atparentingsurvival.com. I've got a podcast, a YouTube channel for kids, and online courses and lots of other stuff. So you can find me over there.
Great. Awesome. And again, thank you. It's been a real pleasure. And I think I know that it's going to have ripple effects and help so many people. So I really, really appreciate your time today.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
I hope this conversation has relieved some anxieties for you, dear listener. There's so much to worry about with kids, but that taking care of our own anxieties is a big piece of that, right? Big, important piece of that. And if you would like some support with mindfulness practices that are research proven to reduce anxiety, please go to mindfulmamamentor.com and check out the resources we have. And tell me what you think. Tell me what your takeaways from this episode. If this was helpful, I'd love to know. It really makes a world of difference when you tell me what you think and whether this episode was helpful for you or not. So please do let me know. I'm at Mindful Mama Mentor on Instagram. So tag me, share it in your stories or whatever. You can take a screenshot of what you're listening to this on and share it. And I would love that. Would just make my little heart just beat a little brighter today. So I'm wishing you a great week. I'm wishing you some peaceful week. I'm wishing you a vaccinated future and some beautiful days. And I will be back in your inbox, in your ears, talking to you next week about understanding attachment. So I'm really excited about that. So I will talk to you again soon. Thank you so much for listening. All the best to you, my friend. Namaste.
I'd say definitely do it. It's really helpful. It will change your relationship with your kids for the better. It will help you communicate better. And I'd say communicate better as a person, as a wife, as a spouse. It's been really a positive influence in our lives. So definitely do it.
I'd say definitely do it. It's so worth it. The money really is inconsequential when you get so much benefit from being a better parent to your children and feeling like you're connecting more with them and not feeling like you're yelling all the time or you're like, why isn't things working? I would say definitely do it. It's so worth it. It'll change you.
No matter what age someone's child is, it's a great opportunity for personal growth and it's a great investment in someone's family. I'm very thankful I had this.
You can continue in your old habits that aren't working, or you can learn some new tools and gain some perspective to shift everything in your parenting.
Are you frustrated by parenting? Do you listen to the experts and try all the tips and strategies, but you're just not seeing the results that you want? Or are you lost as to where to start? Does it all seem so overwhelming with too much to learn? Are you yearning for a community of people who get it, who also don't want to threaten and punish to create cooperation? Hi, I'm Hunter Clark-Fields, and if you answered yes to any of these questions, I want you to seriously consider the Mindful Parenting membership. You will be joining hundreds of members who have discovered the path of mindful parenting and now have confidence and clarity in their parenting. This isn't just another parenting class. This is an opportunity to really discover your unique, lasting relationship, not only with your children, but with yourself. It will translate into lasting, connected relationships, not only with your children, but your partner too. Let me change your life. Go to mindfulparentingcourse.com to add your name to the waitlist, so you will be the first to be notified when I open the membership for enrollment. I look forward to seeing you on the inside. mindfulparentingcourse.com.